Hey everyone, this is The Business of Education, and I'm your host, Kyle Wallgren. Today we have another amazing guest, Mike Ficara. He was recommended by Lisa Collum, one of the amazing ladies that I've got to get to know through my ed tech journey. Mike comes through a background in education, but also serves as Chief Operating Officer of many different companies that we're going to dive into. Mike, welcome to the show.
Kyle, thank you so much for having me on, man. I'm excited to be here today.
Mike, I'm super excited. Mike, we got introduced through Lisa. She's built a curriculum company that spans across 50 different states.
Yep.
Jumping into curriculum, what are one of the biggest things you've learned when scaling a curriculum business?
It's interesting because this is kind of the second time I've dealt into, and startup's a very loose word, right? I think I've met companies that are like 10 years in that still call themselves a startup. I've met companies that it hasn't even been 24 hours and they call themselves a startup. So second time diving into the curriculum world with the startup. I think the first thing I learned is like niche is key, right? I know a lot of times the first startup I worked in that was dealing with curriculum was much wider. This was much more narrow. And I think, and Lisa said something to me when we first met and we first started working together. She's like, this is a really easy sale. And it was never been like that for me in education and some of the previous clients I'd worked with. I'm like, are you sure? And one of the things I've learned, if you have a good product that helps kids and helps teachers, and it's really the right product, it's almost easy to get curriculum into schools, right? You just have to get it in front of the teachers. So I would say what I've learned is when you've created a great product and you believe in it and you're doing the right thing, it's really easy to get it in the teachers and students' hands. It takes work. Easy is a relative term, but it's really just amazed me how easily people were like, "Yep, I'll take it." I even had 2 calls this week where they were like, "No, you don't got to sell us. We just need to know what's the numbers so we can make it work in our budget," which is just amazing. I'm still shocked that we get that response.
I love that answer because, as you know, I have an ed tech company that
Yep.
focuses on reading. And we're raising capital. It seems like all the time, but right now we're doing it. And one of the questions we get is like, we're worried about your sales cycle. And I'm like, I just don't see that. Our product's needed, when we go in and meet with these people, they're like, it makes sense. Just tell us how much. So I'm glad there's somebody else out there that's experiencing that other than myself, because you would think that you're going crazy if you're the only one doing that. But you've
Yep.
also been served as chief operating officer for many other businesses. That's kind of your niche, right? So tell us a little
Yeah.
bit about that.
Yeah, I kid around and say I kind of got like a choose your own adventure career, which is good. I'm turning 44 next week. I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. So the neat thing is that I get to work with clients in a variety of different industries, and throughout my career, I've done stuff in oil and gas, in the energy sector, manufacturing and production, telecommunication. I mean, it's just always getting these different clients in all these different fields. It's really fun because I get to learn about different businesses and how they work. And everyone says their industry is unique, which is somewhat true. Each industry has their subtle nuances, but it also taught me a lot that the fundamentals are the fundamentals. And whether you're a small business, whether you're a big business, the fundamentals are the fundamentals. And learning that from business and learning that really, I think the biggest thing I've learned, and I always say that is people and teamwork and the energy of the business are probably more important than anything else. The product doesn't matter. The process is really important, but the people and the energy are really what makes great companies just fun to work for and just good to be at. And teams mean a lot. We were kidding around about football before we came on. There's something about camaraderie. There's something about energy. It's not just about superstars and smart people. It's about energy.
Yeah, I love that answer. And I'm starting to understand why Lisa recommended that we talk together. So Lisa and I talked after the show, probably just as long as we talked on the show. And
Yeah.
my career, I wasn't in education. I was faced with a challenge with my kids that I wasn't going to let them go through because I had gone through being a non-reader before. So when I looked at jumping into the one, software, and two, education, I was like, it can't be any different than building the other businesses that I built. You know what I mean? There's a set of fundamentals, like you'd said, that are
Yeah.
important. And if you meet those things and then surround yourself with good people to accent your weaknesses, that, anything can be built. So I'm starting to understand why she recommended that we got together. What was one of the biggest hurdles you felt like, or let me reword the question. What's one of the things that you're expecting to see different every time you go into a new field?
That's a good question. Um, I think the more I've seen lately is, and especially in some businesses, and I think it's funny because we're technically going into a recession, and I get that's happening, and I'm not a financial expert, so I don't know either way, but it's going into businesses and seeing how people are managing their finances. That is the biggest thing right now. Like, hey, we're either making a lot of money, but we don't know where it's going, or we're not making enough money, but we've got a really good product. So it's always, it always does. I kidded around before about Lisa's product being easy to sell. It always does come down to sales, right? I think sales cures all. But when I come in, it's always interesting what I'm seeing more and more, which I really tend to appreciate. And as I've gotten older, I used to go into the businesses where it's like, hey, how can we get more sales? How can we make more money? How can we do this? I love coming in and hearing what the mission of the business is. That's
Ooh, I
more
like that.
important to me. So a lot of times I'll come into businesses and I have people come to us and it's just like, we got to do this or we got to do that or we got to make this kind of money. I, I'm at the point now where it's like, man, I want to do stuff that's fun. And if a business has a good mission, and they have a good sort of direction that they want to go in. And you'd be surprised. It's not just in education. I also do work in the cigar industry as
Hmm.
well. And the amount of giving back that people do to the places in Nicaragua and the Dominican Republic where a lot of these cigars are made, and even Cuba. A lot of these companies, while they're doing amazing things and they're selling great cigars and it's a luxury item and there's that whole industry, they're also doing tons of work giving back. And that's been the really neat thing for me to learn. In doesn't matter what industry you go in, it's like, hey, what's your mission and how are you giving back? Like that's the first thing I love doing when I sort of go to work with a client or a company.
No, that's awesome. So you said that you had worked. This is your second education.
Yeah,
Co-
yeah. Well, I mean, this is really probably Lisa's probably the fifth or sixth probably that I've come along, but it's one of the longest ones that I've worked with consistently. Lisa and I just really hit it off in the beginning, and we've kind of been working together for a really long time now. I started in the classroom,
Okay.
but her and I have been working together for a
So
while. So
when you
yeah.
say you started in the classroom, were you a teacher or?
I was, and it's funny watching some of your videos and learning what you guys did. I mean, resonated with me so much. I was a terrible student growing up. I failed first grade. It's in my book behind me. It's one of the chapters in my book. It's called "I Failed First Grade." Even my kids all kidded around with me when they passed first grade. They're like, "Oh, I'm officially smarter than Dad." That bar was set pretty low. And when it comes to reading, and I really don't tell the story often, but I think because of what you do, it's so relevant. When I was a kid, I was a terrible reader. I'm still a terrible
So
reader.
am I.
In all honesty, I haven't read my book. I read it when we were putting it together, probably chapter by chapter, but I never sat down and read it in the whole. The only reason I heard it all the way through is because I recorded an audiobook. But I still haven't read it. And when I was a kid, I remember, I think I was like 11 or 12. I finally got a TV in my room and I would sneak like watching TV. And even before I had a TV, I would sneak around the corner. And I would go like see what my parents were watching at night. My sister would get in trouble because she was sneaking reading in her bed. And she was gifted and smarter than me, but I was never a good student. And always like, hey, if you're not a good student, you're not going to be successful, which I think is a very relative term
Yeah.
nowadays. Or you're not going to do well, and especially if you couldn't read. I mean, I grew up in the '80s. I'm turning 44. That like if you couldn't read, like they had booking and then all this stuff, and reading was kind of the weakest thing for me. I struggled through elementary, middle, even high school. I barely graduated. Failed out of college even at one point. And when I failed out of college, I was waiting tables, and one of my old teachers came in. And he says, "Hey, do you want to substitute teach?" And I'm like, "That sounds like the easiest job ever. Yes, I want to do that." And I figured I could, substitute teacher and they wait tables at night and figure out what I'm going to do in my life. And I just fell in love with education. And I went to Catholic high school, and went into my counselor at the college that I actually failed out of UCF in Orlando and moved back to South Florida. So I went to FAU and I said, "Hey, like, what can I get a degree in?" And they're like, "Well, looks like you could do like psychology with a minor in theology." She goes, "That's weird." I said, "I'll do that." So I ended up teaching Bible and ethics for the better part of a
Oh,
decade,
I love that.
and then went and got my master's in educational technology, which I got almost all A's and B's. I got it from Full Sail University, which is ironic. I'm a terrible student, did that. And I taught ethics and Bible and really enjoyed that. Did a lot of technology stuff on the side. I mean, this is in the early 2000, 2005, 2007. Twitter was just coming out. Podcasting was just coming out. YouTube was just coming out. You can still find them. I put my lessons online. I have my kids listen to podcasts and Twitter, and everyone's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "This is the future of education." I'm like, "This is where it's at." And I took an AP position at a Catholic school after I got my master's, and they're like, "Yeah, we're designing curriculum for an online school." I'm like, "Oh, this is perfect. This is like my dream job," because in education, the career path to success, right? Or if you're going to climb the ladder, you can become an AP and a principal, and maybe a superintendent if you really want to go. So I was like, "Oh, this is what I need to do." And it turns out the principal and her brother were kind of like sneakily hiding a startup within this elementary school. And they were trying to be the first online Catholic school. And they really didn't have any curriculum. They didn't have anything. I absolutely freaked out. I tried to get my old job back. I couldn't. And they're like, you got to stay. And I'm like, all right, well, I guess I'll dig into this. And they started taking me out on presentations. And they were like, hey, just talk about the curriculum. And then they were like, well, you're really good at presenting. You're really good at sales. And I'm like, I'm just teaching. That's what I do. So we ended up growing the Catholic school side of things. And then her brother also wanted to grow it in the public sector. So I started going on presentations with him. We ended up growing both companies to about 34 different states. And then Wayne Huizinga invested into the
Oh,
company.
wow.
Which, if you don't know who Wayne is, he's the guy that, founded and grew Blockbuster, Waste Management. He used to own the Miami Dolphins. And I was promised everything under the sun: stock options, equity, my own private plane. I got none of that. I got to fly on Wayne's private 747, which was cool because it was like in the living room in there. But I learned a lot from that. I learned from the guys that scaled and grew Blockbuster. I learned from the guys that had worked on a couple other projects with Wayne as well. And then I learned from some leaders in education. But when that ended, I was left with nothing. I was basically making still the same, $60,000 when I left there. And I was like, hey, I'll go into consulting. And that's kind of how I made my
It's
transition.
interesting seeing how business people of that caliber conduct business. We've, with
Oh,
we work with Shaquille and his group, and every day I get somebody will email me or message me on LinkedIn, be like, oh, you should tell Shaquille this or that or the other thing. And I'm like, if you guys think that every day that I get on a phone call for our morning stand up and Shaquille's on the phone, you guys are crazy. The guy owns over 400 businesses. Could you imagine if
yeah.
he was tuning into every morning stand up? But what it does is it gives you access to people that are professionals in every single vertical. So when you do have those hard questions, you can ask experts, at ease. And that's one of the things that I've been super grateful for with working with Shaquille's group for sure. The technology thing, putting classes online, that was, you're saying it was ahead of your time when you did it. That's kind of like where Jordan Peterson's rock is now. You know what I mean? Like, he wouldn't be the person he is
Yeah.
today if he didn't do the online classes on YouTube, looking back
Yep.
at his career. So it's interesting to see the believers, Joe Rogan, his podcast, just the believer in what it was going to be, and
Yep.
what it's become is ultimately some of the biggest voices in the country. So that's super interesting to watch that. That being said, with the new technology coming into the class, where do you think we can still strengthen that? How do you feel like technology can really make an impact in schools right now?
Yeah, I mean it's a great question. I got four kids, 16 to 6, and it's really neat to see the experience my older two have kind of gone through. So I have a 16 and a 13-year-old, and then looking at the 7 and 6-year-old, and just how different that span of their educational experience has been when it comes to technology, right? My son's in a high school where it's one-to-one iPads. My other son's in a middle school where it's one-to-one iPads. My even elementary kids are using iPads and technology. And you mentioned kind of being preemptive. I remember before the fear of just the internet
Mm-hmm.
alone, right? Like when it was like, oh, don't use Wikipedia because that's not a valid source, or don't, use this. So I think, and it just amazes me at this point. You talk about reading. When I was a kid, if you said you couldn't read, that was I mean, you basically were
Mm-hmm.
considered
Yeah.
stupid, right? Like, for lack of a better word, which I know that's kind of a bad word to little kids. I had to learn that the hard way, but that's what people said. I'm shocked how many educators today still say that they don't understand or are not comfortable with technology. That's almost as bad as being a teacher and saying you can't read, you know? And I think the only thing that I think we have a little ways to go, and I think it's getting better, is people not fearing new technology when it comes in, right? Everyone's freaking about AI and chat GPT and, oh no, what do we do with this? What do we do with that? If you look at preemptively, every form of technology we've been afraid of is now a crucial foundation in education. We were scared that online teaching or online coursework was going to take away and eliminate the need for the teacher. No, it's just
Mm-hmm.
made them better. We were afraid of Google and the kids aren't going to be smart and know how to figure out answers. No, that's not true. They're still doing that. We have the same fears with ChatGPT. I think we need to eliminate the fear in teachers of technology. And I hope as the generations get older and they've grown up in it, that will happen. But I think that's the biggest change we need right
I
now, in
love
my
that.
opinion.
I actually use that same concept with, and I'm father of four, so 10, 9, 5, 2. But I use
Oh,
that
so yeah.
same idea when raising my kids, and at first my wife was like real nervous of my style because we're blended family. But like, when the kid runs across the back of the couch, don't tell him don't tell him he's going to fall. Let him learn that lesson and eliminate fear from their ideas. Because my grandfather told me when I was young, the only thing that's ever going to hold me back is fear and common sense. And for some reason, I guess I just wasn't gifted with a lot of fear emotions in my body. It's one of the only emotions that you're actually taught, not born with. Um, so that whole concept of not being scared to jump or not being scared to risk, something that I've built my entire life off of. And I guess I even rode bulls as a kid and rodeoed. So like fear has been something
Yeah.
that I've been able to harness very well. And I bless, or I am thankful for that, because all of my success has come off of that. And I think if we could pass that on into the classroom, that the amount of growth we could pass on to our kids and our teachers would be exponential. I love that you said that. AI, you brought that up. Some of the things we get pushback on is accuracy issues. You know what I mean? And you'll watch somebody go in and test our product, and then they start trying to like trick the product into failing. And I'm like, how many kids walk into your classroom right now and try and trick the book into the word being wrong, and they look at you at this like real funny look, like, what do you mean? You know what I mean? I'm like, no kid walks in and pretends that this word's right or wrong. Like, they're not intentionally finding words to make it think that you said the wrong thing. They're trying to actually say the right words. So, to see people even like push against technology to try and make it fail has been an interesting learning process for me as well. What are some ways that you think AI could really help the classroom?
Yeah, I mean, and before I answer that, to your point though, with the pushback on the technology, it's funny we don't question that though with the humans in front of the classroom, right? Like teachers, and I know because I was one of them, we're infallible, right? Like how many teachers could have had a bad night? How many teachers could have maybe not fully understand the curriculum? I mean, you put 200, 300, 400 kids in a school, and you've got teachers that have been there for 20 years, and you got teachers that have
Mm-hmm.
been there for 20 minutes. Yet we don't question that at all. We're like, oh no,
Right.
they'll all be fine. They'll all learn. It'll be okay. For some reason with technology we're a little bit more hesitant with that, so I think when it comes to AI, I think the advantage to AI, the advantage to any technology, right? I think the advantage to AI is the same advantages that have always been there with technology. It levels the
Right.
playing field a little bit. We even talk about that with top score with the curriculum. Like if your teacher's comfortable teaching writing and they love it and they're a great writing teacher, they could take it and it's going to make them even better. It's going to take them and make them Kobe Bryant, right? If your teacher's new and they're uncomfortable with writing, you could give that to them, and it's gonna make them. I always say James Jones, who was on the Miami Heat that LeBron James loved. He was a good player, but when he had LeBron with him, LeBron helped make him great. Like that's what I think technology does. It takes the great teachers and makes them the rock stars that we want them to be, the legends, the goats, and it takes the good teachers and
Right.
it makes them great. And that's what we really want. And when you think about it, like, why do you want to do that? Because of what we want to do for kids. Like, it's just, why wouldn't you want to put AI in place? Why wouldn't you want to put these technologies that takes even this? And my wife's a teacher, so I know takes this much off a teacher's plate to give them either 15 more
For
minutes at
sure.
home so they're happy, or gives them 15 minutes more in the classroom so they can help more kids. That's the power of
I love
technology.
that.
Whether it's AI, whether it's whatever comes after AI, whether it's an older technology we're not adapting,
The
that I think is the
You're
power.
so right with that, and that's kind of how I and I'll circle back to one of the things with the many different teachers. I say, if you put the same kid in front of five different teachers in the room to do a reading test, you're going to get five different results, even though the kid read the same thing
Yep.
one time. So you do hit the nail on the head, and that's where we feel like the speech technology can really, you know, even that out, especially with, new teachers coming into this space. There's such a shortage right now with new teachers coming in. And when you
Hmm.
talk to a lot of older teachers, they're kind of reluctant that, they wish they would have maybe took a different career path. I feel like they're totally underappreciated. And you're married to one. I'm sure you hear about
100%.
these struggles all the time, that teachers are underappreciated. They're the front lines to our kids' growth. And then, as soon as something goes wrong, the parents want to jump down their throat. So I do want to, that was my whole mission, to try and like give time back to teachers. And that was what I felt like my value add could be. And I'm glad we align on that. Your book, like Socks on a Rooster. I've always wanted to write a book, but I think the reason why this just became so interesting was to me because I consider myself a non-reader. Um, and I've been told by 100 people, you need to write a book. Your story is so interesting. It would inspire kids. But like, walk me through that. Like, what's that look like, being somebody struggling with reading. What was that journey like?
So, much like going to school, I cheated on this completely. I had a ghostwriter come to me and wanted me to be his outsourced COO, and he couldn't afford the services. And I was like, well, let's barter.
That's awesome.
So I'll discount my rate and you ghostwrite my book. So that was how I was able to do it. If I had to sit down and write a book, I'd probably be in the same place I am right now. I'd be like, oh, it's in here, right? Because I used a ghostwriter, that was the only way I got it out. That was the only way I knew it would happen. Which typical student, I always say, some students cheat in school. Even when I was a teacher, I said cheating wasn't allowed in my classroom. But if you were a creative collaborator or an outsourcer, I could kind of see that, So I just outsourced it, and then I wrote the book. The title is a nod to my father. When I was a kid, we didn't, I always say we weren't really, I don't want to say we were poor, but we didn't have a lot of money either, so we were kind of like right there in the middle. My parents were really hardworking people. And my dad, to kind of freshen things up every once in a while, he loved moving around furniture. To this day, I hated it. Like, my furniture stays where it is as soon as we buy it. And every time we move something and get in the right place, he'd say, like socks on a rooster. So as an adult, I was like, I started saying that when I was a teacher, and then I started saying it. I said it in college a lot, and then I started saying it when I was a teacher, and the kids looked at me like I was crazy. And it's one of those things where I think, especially in the entrepreneurship community, you can say a lot of things, but if you don't know the meaning behind them, you kind of look a little silly. So the book was kind of a nod to my father. And plus, if I was writing something about entrepreneurship and just put like a fancy business title, no one was going to buy it. It leads to great questions on shows like this. And it leads people to, if they see it on a bookshelf, oh, wait a second, what is that? And then same thing with the audiobook. It came time to do the audiobook, and I almost recorded myself because everyone told me the same thing. You got to record it. It's got to be in your voice. I'm like, but my whole business and what I do is about how CEOs and leaders need to outsource the things that are going to take, too much of their time. So I hired somebody to be a voice actor, and they recorded the book for me as well, along with a couple of my friends to do some voiceover work, and they participated in it as well. And I did a little intro explaining that at the beginning. So the process was fun. It was challenging, though, from the point of editing and reading, because like I said, I'm not a big reader. I'm one of the people that kind of highlights the text on the computer and has it
I do
read it
that
back
every
to me,
day.
just because I find that's just the quickest way to do things. So it was a neat thing, but like, that's what I mean. So for a kid like me who's, listened to more books than I've read, and I know that's kind of like the Gary Vee cliche now, and I didn't know there was a guy like that when I was a kid, but it was just very rewarding, though. Like, it's one of those things where like you can't take that away from me. It's pretty
The
cool. It's pretty cool.
So you talked about cheating, but you also mentioned outsourcing. We'll throw Mr. Henry Ford into it, and he didn't need to know all the answers. He just needed to know the people that did, right? So
Yeah.
I agree with outsourcing a lot, and I spend 90% of my day making sure that I have the right people doing the right things. And I think that that's probably my strongest standpoint, because I got kicked out of school in grade 9. I went to work at the oil field. I was a non-reader. So to get to this point in my life's totally, I think I was voted like less likely to succeed early on in school. You know what I mean? Like when they passed that little thing around. And now, I look back at my life and I'm like, it's just been this wild journey that, I've been super blessed to be on. What's one of the things, if you're giving advice to like young entrepreneurs, help them navigate the emotion of letting go, because I think that's probably the hardest thing for a young entrepreneur to understand. Like, you need to trust. And I have that problem with some of my managers. They'll be like, you have a whole team, let that go. But I'd love to hear your opinion on that.
It's one of the hardest things, I think, for me to learn even early on. It was because I think if you're an entrepreneur and you're somebody that really wants to do well, you want to feel like you're bringing value, right? And I think the minute people outsource something, they feel like they're not bringing value. And I think for young entrepreneurs, the thing to understand is, yes, you are 100% correct. No one will do this better than you. Absolutely. And I always tell them that. I said, okay, but how do we get it to 80%, right? Because if we get it to 80%, we could fix the other 20% that people aren't doing. So, and it's hard because, especially early on in the early stages of business, most entrepreneurs are starting something. If they're doing it for money, they're usually good at outsourcing because they
Mm-hmm.
don't care, right? But if you're doing it for passion, it's like, man, I can't not have my finger on this pulse, or I can't not do this, or I can't not do that. So I think it's a hard skill to develop. I think you have to learn how to give things up, but I think you also have to learn how to understand people, because it's, and I was fortunate to be a teacher, so I know too, it's really helped me in kind of like teaching CEOs how to do this. You really have to teach people how to do things, and you're going to have some people in your class that are like super smart. You don't got to tell them anything; they're just able to run with it. And you're going to have some people that, like, you need to sit with me for an hour afterwards, and you need to know who those people are when you're hiring them for the different positions. And I think if you're an entrepreneur and you can get those two things out of the way, number one, no one's going to do it as good as me, and I'm okay with that. And then number two, I'm going to have to
Nope.
teach people before I just hand it off. You can't just hand it off. They want to do one of the two. They either want to own it completely or they want to just hand it off completely. I'm like, that doesn't work, guys. We got to meet
Yeah,
in the
no, I
middle
agree with
somewhere.
that. That was one of the things that I was really interested to see how Lisa explained, just because, you know, writing curriculum and then trusting somebody to write curriculum is a huge difference, right? So
Yep.
that's, and to hear her talk about it was interesting as well, just because it just does change, right? So much, especially when you go from like packing binders in your living room to a 50 state curriculum company. You also do a podcast. The episode that I seen was on your cigars. Tell us about that. Cigars. I'm a cigar guy myself. My wife thinks they
Nice.
stink, but I love golfing and smoking cigars. So how'd you get into that?
Yeah. So there's a couple podcasts that I'm actually involved with. One of them is the cigar one. I have the Start Down, which is my longest running podcast, and I'm just doing one right now called Sopranopreneur, which is entrepreneurial lessons from the show The Sopranos. And growing up, it's funny you talk about cigars, and once again in the '80s, things were a little bit different. My grandfather smoked, my grandmother smoked, and then I had an Uncle Johnny cigar. So you knew the night, like my grandparents came over, there's always like, a smoke smell in the house. But when Uncle Johnny Cigar came over, there was really a smoke smell in the house. And even then, I didn't like it as a kid. And of course, as he got older, and I got older, we kind of would, when he was around, we would have one. And I think, probably in my early 20s, I tried it. And then when he passed away, me, my dad, and then I met my wife at the time, my father-in-law, we all kind of got really into cigars. And it's something I've always enjoyed. I think it's just, being Italian, it's a camaraderie thing. It's funny you mentioned golf because everyone's like, "Do you golf?" I'm like, "No, I don't golf, but I drive golf carts, I drink, and I smoke cigars." So I'm happy to join you uh, for the activity. I just won't be hitting the ball, most golfers tell me, "Well, that's all we really do out there anyway." I said, "Yeah, but I'm not buying clubs."
I'm just
So,
coming.
and then I had a former student of mine actually posted on social media that he was working for this cigar company, and I was like, "Hey, man, that's really cool. I'd love to learn more about it." And then I told him what I was doing. How I'm kind of like a outsource CEO. He goes, "Oh, that's exactly what this company needs." And they kind of brought me in as well. So I think it's ironic. One of my former students I'm working on in the cigar industry, and we design boxes and accessories for the cigar industry. And then through that, I've gotten to. I remember the first cigar convention I went to, it was like meeting my heroes. I mean, all these guys, Arturo Puente, Nick Perdermo. I'm sorry, all these guys were there, and it was really neat to meet them. Kind of the guys behind the craft, and that's another industry where it's just camaraderie and collaboration are key. And that's really been a big foundation of it. So it's really been neat to be a part of
The
that.
that's so awesome. The being a mafia guy, that was something that I always thought would be such a interesting life when I was a kid, back living that lifestyle.
Yeah,
I guess that's like hitting fear in the face, right? But um
yeah.
it's definitely interesting. And I actually the guy's name's drawing a blank from me, but he was the FBI agent that investigated the boxing scandal and almost became partners with Michael Franzese. Um, it'll come to me in a minute, but
Okay.
I got to have a conversation with him the other day, and I was like a little pig in mud. You know what I mean? I was just like, I bet you know so many interesting stories that would be mind blowing.
Oh yeah.
But his wife was a teacher, and she made an introduction to me, and it was a great conversation. But Mike, I like to end the show with a question around networking. Um,
Sure.
how important is your network to your success, and how do you to tell some young up and comer in business, what would you give them for advice around networking?
Sure. Network is one of my favorite questions. I strongly believe in it. I'm involved in a couple of great networking groups here. But in my book, I talk about this. A lot of people will tell you your network
Mhm.
is your net worth. And that's true to an extent, but there's a big difference between networking and being a
I
groupie.
like that.
And a lot of people don't realize it. They're either a groupie or they're in a fraternity. Your network is so powerful, but if you can't learn from it and apply it, that's the key. I see so many young entrepreneurs who are going to every class and every seminar and every workshop, and they're just, oh, I've got all my notes, and they're even posting on their notes online and sharing them with everybody. If you're not taking that networking and taking the advice and listening to the people around you and then applying it and then going back and asking more questions, you're missing out on the power of networking, and you're either in a fraternity or you're a groupie. And that's the biggest difference in networking. And there's a lot of traps out there right now that will put you in the ladder. So be very careful when you're networking, which groups you join and how you're
No, I
applying what
love
you
that.
learn.
I never thought about it like that, but I really do love that. I think, I've been blessed and the thing that I've learned is that people that appreciate networking, they're okay answering questions, right? So like a lot of times I'm like, just ask them, go call so and so, them, ask them, and like, oh, I don't want to bother
Yeah.
them. You're not bothering them. They love to share their knowledge.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's one of the biggest things. But Mike, I appreciate you on the show. We're going to make sure to share your book in the link below. I'll share your podcast as well, so everybody can check them out. But Mike, I appreciate you coming on and having a conversation with us.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and anyone listening, if you're going to put the link to the book, and you can also put the link
Yes,
to
sir. I
my
will.
social media. If you DM me on any social media and you say you want a copy of the book, I'll send your
I
listeners
appreciate
one
it.
for free. So they
I
DM me, I'll
appreciate it.
send
And
them
then
one
if
for
somebody
free.
wanted to get a hold of you, Mike, speaking of social media, what's the best way to do that?
Best ways is just MikeFicara.com, or you can find me as Mike Ficara on all social media. So that's the best way to track me down. And just shoot me a DM. I'm always in the DM. So
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
thanks, Kyle. Appreciate you.
Talk soon.
All right, bye.